Yet we have to deal with IPR and innovation and supply chains and distributed manufacturing, which is where the world is going. So we can still try to reap the benefits of low-wage manufacturing, but the world's moving away from that very rapidly. So we are and that's where I really feel that the sense of urgency about the future is really missing. And almost everything we talk about, and how to inject that, how to get that injection that Pratap wants, I think is really important in thinking about our future.
Okay, Rajat? I completely agree with you that the inverted duty structure needed to be changed. I think in the budget, there may be opportunity to do this outside the budget as well, maybe down the line. But I think what happened was there was an intent, and I think in certain electronic items it was addressed a couple of years ago. In 2014, there was a change in the inverted duty structure for some electronic items. But I think in this budget, the attention got diverted, and so trade and customs did not receive the attention. I think a lot of time was spent on infrastructure investment, rural distress, and so on. But it's not off the table. I think that inverted duty structure, the rationalization, is not off the table. But it may. And if you read, Arvind's previous economic survey and this economic survey, and you link the Chakravyuh, talk about we move from socialism to market without exit, you need to reform the labor laws, and you need to take up manufacturing to 25%, and whether manufacturing with its institutional dynamism, which you've done so much work on the informal sector, whether that's the right way, whether this institutional dynamism of contractual and informal employment will be able to address the problem, which really manufacturing was sought to do, which is to kind of employ, as Shekhar said, the low-skilled, unskilled workers China did, whether manufacturing would be the panacea to address our problems. So there is some discussion in the previous economic survey as well as this economic survey, and inverted duty structure is a part of an overall design for Make in India and to kind of trigger manufacturing in India, but it could still well be done. I think it's on the table. It's just that in this budget it hasn't been addressed, but it needs to. I agree. It needs to be addressed. On the question, on Rajesh's question on what are the other right-hand side variables in that regression? Well, as I mentioned, we've got income, which is the export-weighted shares of our partner countries, which account for about 70% of our trade, and we've got the real effective exchange rate. But a variable that looks at the trade agreements of our partner countries and the other trade agreements in the world, that's not there. But as I said, it is work in progress, and I dare say we will be able to do that as a working paper, and you should watch out ICRIER's website for this. But I think it is going to be addressed. And on Tom's question of our inflation differentials being high, absolutely, and that's contributing to the appreciation of the real effective exchange rate. And that, I don't know whether it's 300 basis points, but that does contribute to the lack of competitiveness of our exports. On Surjit's question of not the exchange rate, the other question on the GDP numbers. Well, if one disregards, in addition to what Pratap said, if one disregards the new series completely, I mean, just go with the old series and look at we haven't done this in ICRIER, but if you believe some of the projections that are done on the old series by certain investment houses, and those numbers have come out in the recent past, those numbers look quite low. Some of them are at 5% for the current year. Up to about 5% if you do that. So even if you're not picking and choosing on the current series of IIP, stretched corporate balance sheet, and high growth, I'm not disbelieving the numbers, as Pratap said. I'm not disbelieving. All I said was that there should be some way to reconcile these numbers. And as you said, the IIP is now 3.2%, and we could potentially grow at 7.5%, 8%. And then one will have to look at the investment, the private sector investment, the ICORs, and so on. And I haven't done that, but we could do that. Or we could, but disregard all these numbers and just project the old series, as I said, and the numbers don't come out to be too rosy. Last comment that I would make is on what is the vision for trade. I've said this during my presentation, and I think Shekhar alluded to it as well, participation in global value chains, and what is our vision. I think that vision needs to be developed on whether we are going to be in TPP, whether we are not going to be in TPP, whether we are more articulate. There are, people who are talking about it, but a government, Ministry of Commerce driven view of where we are headed, whether it's RCEP, whether it's TPP. TPP, frankly, China is quite ready to get into the TPP even as we speak. India, in terms of its positioning on TPP, there's a lot of domestic structural reform, especially on state-owned enterprises, intellectual property, labor, all of that. We need a lot of domestic structural reform before we can actually think of becoming a member. But at least we should, begin to plan now if there is a vision to join the TPP, and if that means a lot of trade diversion for us. Views are mixed on this, by the way. Even within the government, views are mixed, whether it's a spectrum. Rathin has already, I share the pessimism that with already stressed balance sheet in the telecom sector, with huge amounts envisaged to be got from spectrum auctions, and with data and net neutrality, all those debates happening, and stressed balance sheets and the financial health of the telecom sector, that kind of money from spectrum auctions. There will be some renewals and there will be some new spectrum that will be auctioned as well. But that looks iffy, even if telecom sector recovers. Lots of other questions on recapitalization of banks and so on. I think those are interesting questions, but
thank you. Thank you, Rajat. Shanthi, would you like to come in on the social sector issues here?
I don't have too many questions, only a couple of comments, I think.
Yeah.
I would take your comment first. I did not say that the state governments needed capacity development. My concern was more about the panchayats, right? And I have worked with capacity development programs at the municipalities level in Tamil Nadu, and I know that these things can work. That was on financial management and accrual-based system of accounting. It worked beautifully in Tamil Nadu, and all municipalities converted to this accrual-based system. It can be done. But panchayats, it's more like a concern rather than a criticism. One does not want to, criticize the whole notion of fiscal federalism. What have we achieved being Delhi-centric? In the last 60 years, what sort of fantastic achievements have we had in social sectors? I think moving development away, especially in the social sector, to governments, levels of government that are closer to the people, I think is an extremely welcome move. Only thing is, there are caveats. I know that the Finance Commission itself talks about capacity building, and they have said that the state governments will do the necessary and so on, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes. I wish them luck.
Okay,
on the other point about healthcare spending and education spending and having to look at both public and private spending, I take your point. That is how we should normally look at it. But the thing is, I am talking about that 50-60% of India's population that needs public health care and public education. Because this is the 60% of India's population that cannot pay 7.5 lakhs for an open heart surgery or 5 lakh for a kidney transplant, whatever it costs nowadays. So I am talking about them, and from their perspective, if you see, the total amount of 7% of GDP that is being invested in the social sector is awfully small. It's woefully small. That was the point that I was trying to make. And in any case, who is to sort of say what is enough? When do we say what is enough? I mean, you can never say that. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. You look at the HDI numbers. 5 years of average schooling, is that acceptable for us? Never mind what 15% is being invested in education sector. Is 5 years of average schooling acceptable? So, that is the way I would like to look at these problems. Not look at it from percentages allotted, but from the point of view of what has come out of this. What is the outcome? That is my concern.
Okay, thank you.
Two very pointed, direct questions. One to Dr. Mehta. Somebody amongst the panelists said something beautiful, that there's a sense of urgency about our destiny, and going ahead planning that specifically for the health sector. So do you think that if there is some sort of an index, for example, a health transparency index, which talks about analyzing allocations and spending state and center-wise, that would be able to inform the country better about health decisions, and like we are talking about prioritizing health or prioritizing expenditure for the social sector? That's one. My second question is on agriculture, is to Dr. Shah or anybody else who would like to take it. I stand a little worried today because a lot of the media and some of us here applaud the government for saying that this is a pro-agricultural budget, which it may be, but also applauding the government saying they have a roadmap for the country now. I will be happy if I stand corrected today, but I don't think that a fiscal intention or just revival of budgetary allocations for irrigation, for creation of jobs, is any sort of a reflection of a government having a roadmap for something like agriculture. It is sad that it took 2.5 years for this country to have a relook at something like Manrega. I'm not saying it is the most beautiful scheme. I know it's very handout in nature, but if you had totally dismissed it, you probably didn't buy to the model. And then after 2.5 years, you don't come up with anything new. You revive a similar scheme. You don't even put any new additions or gender-specific roles in it. And it's so easy to say that you put a sum of money into that scheme and it'll give you new jobs. Dr. Shah, I'd like to ask you if it is so simple for a government to just make an allocation and say you can double the number of farm incomes in a country which is struggling with a huge agrarian crisis. I'm sorry, but it's not about doubling farmer incomes, but right now it's about that farmer who does not even hold a land substantial enough to be called his or her own. Similarly, about crop insurance, we all know that the number of people even trying to avail crop insurance is such a small number. And also, I think the whole game about insurance is way more complicated. And it's sad that the finance minister tried to sell this again and tried to get this as a populist measure in terms of the agriculture sector. So, Dr. Shah, your comments on creating jobs so quickly. It'll be wonderful if they can do so, and on crop insurance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'm Bharun Mitra from Liberty Institute. I had a question for Dr. Mehta particularly, but in general on the politics of the situation, because I think it is really critical. And one distinction that I seem to feel this time round is, in the past, whenever we have had political confrontation, the attempt by most sides, particularly the governing side, had been to reduce the high voltage campaigns on which is raising the conflict bar. This time round, we seem to be deliberately wanting to get into political conflict, and my question is, if that is indeed the case, then is that actually a strategy to avoid or divert attention from the economic challenges that all of you mentioned?
The investments in urban areas. I mean, is the shift towards agriculture just a course correction, or is it a short-term response to rural distress? And have we abandoned the emphasis on cities? I mean, I thought that one of the good things about this government was that they had signaled an intention to take our cities more seriously. And even for rural areas, as a long-term path out of poverty, you want to be focusing on cities. So have we shifted away entirely and into agriculture, or are we still going to focus? Is there sufficient allocation for the urban agenda? So that's one question. And the second, I think maybe it's for Pratap. For those of us who need to try and understand, what is the government's long-term strategy, and we're constantly looking at speeches and documents, what